I was not allowed to go, probably quite rightly, at that stage in my career.
On a cold November morning, Princess Anne opened an envelope that someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure she would never receive. What was inside didn't just expose a scandal, it exposed a deal made long before a crown ever touched anyone's head. This is what they didn't want found. The document that should not exist. The fields of Gatcombe Park did not care who you were. That was precisely why she loved them. At 5:30 in the morning, with the Gloucestershire sky still bruised and undecided between night and dawn, Princess Anne drove her heels into the grey mare's flanks and let the animal do what both of them needed. Run. Not a canter, not a measured, supervised trot for the benefit of photographers positioned at the estate boundary. A full, flat, unrestrained gallop across frost-locked ground that cracked and gave beneath each stride like the earth itself was reluctant to yield. The cold was extraordinary. The kind that doesn't announce itself gradually, but arrives all at once, seizing the lungs on the first breath, pressing against the cheekbones, turning every exhale into a small, brief ghost that the wind immediately erased. November in Gloucestershire was not a gentle thing. It never had been. Anne had ridden these fields in every conceivable version of English weather for over 40 years, and she had never once considered moving somewhere easier. Easy had never been the point. If she rode the way she had always done everything, without performance, without audience, without the faint self-consciousness that afflicted people who had spent too long being watched. The estate sprawled around her in the gray pre-light, its familiar contours softened by the morning mist that lay low across the ground like something sleeping. The tree line to the east was a dark, ragged silhouette against a sky just beginning to consider the color amber. Somewhere beneath the mist, the land dipped and rolled in the particular unhurried way of very old English countryside, as though it had been here long enough to have an opinion about urgency, and that opinion was contempt. This was the 1 hour that belonged entirely to her. No schedule, no briefings, no carefully worded public statements reviewed by 3 different offices before a single word reached daylight. No protocol, no cameras, no quiet army of staff and secretaries and protection officers orbiting at respectful distances. Just the mare, the cold, the dark, and the particular freedom that only exists in the precise window between the world going to sleep and the world waking up again. She had protected this hour for decades, guarded it the way certain people guard the last true thing they own, which is why she almost didn't register him at first. A shape at the far edge of the field. Moving wrong, moving fast. She pulled back on the reins, and the mare resisted, tossing her head, momentum fighting instruction, before finally slowing into a tight, irritable circle. Anne steadied her with one hand and looked again toward the shape resolving itself through the mist. James Holford was running, not walking quickly with some apologetic lean to his posture, not jogging with the sheepish expression of a man interrupting something he knows he shouldn't. Running. His coat was open and flapping behind him in the raw morning air, his breath coming out in rapid white bursts, one hand pressed flat against his chest over something. An envelope. She could see it now, manila yellow against the dark wool of his jacket, clutched against him as though he was afraid it might escape. Anne sat very still on the mare and watched him come. In 11 years of service, James Holford had never once raised his voice in her presence. He was a man of extraordinary, almost architectural composure, the kind that wasn't performed or practiced, but simply structural, load-bearing, as fundamental to who he was as anything else. She had seen him manage genuine crises with the unruffled efficiency of someone updating a grocery list. She had watched him deliver difficult news, cancellations, complications, the occasional small catastrophe of royal scheduling, with a steadiness that she had, privately, deeply respected. He did not run. He reached her, finally, and stopped, bent forward, both hands on his knees, the envelope now held out toward her at arm's length, his hand visibly trembling, whether from the cold or from something else she couldn't yet determine, and something in her chest told her not to assume it was the cold. She took it from him without a word. The seal broke cleanly under her gloved thumb. 3 pages, folded twice, unfolded in her hands with a particular stiffness of documents printed recently and handled carefully. A land registry header across the top of the first page. Below it, dense columns of legal text, transfer registrations, trust filings, notary certifications, processing dates. She read. The mare shifted beneath her, a slow sideways unease, the animal registering something traveling up through the saddle that Anne had not yet permitted herself to show. She didn't notice the movement. Her eyes were moving down the first page with the focused, undeviating attention of someone who had spent a lifetime reading between the careful lines of official language and finding what lived there. They stopped, halfway down page 2, at a trust name, at a filing date. The field was completely silent. Even the wind had dropped, suddenly, completely, as though the morning had drawn a breath and was holding it. Somewhere beyond the mist, far across the estate, a single crow called once, then nothing. The silence that followed was absolute in the specific way that silence has become when something has just irrevocably changed. She went back to the top of page 1. Read it again, slower. The way you reread something when your mind is quietly, desperately hoping it misread it the first time. It hadn't. The trust name. The processing channel. So narrow, so deliberately obscure that it existed practically speaking only for those who had been specifically shown where to find it. The covenant reference buried in the legal footnotes. Acknowledged and then sidestepped with a procedural elegance that would have taken months to construct. And the date. Printed cleanly at the bottom of the transfer authorization, 6 weeks before the coronation, before the abbey, before the procession and the orb and the ancient choreography of permanence. Before the world watched a new chapter of the monarchy, open with all the ceremony designed, above everything else, to signal that certain things do not change. While all of that was being arranged, the oaths rehearsed, the robes pressed, the history polished to its highest shine. Someone had been moving pieces that were never theirs to move, quietly, efficiently, in the full and considered confidence that no one would look. Anne lowered the pages. She stared at the tree line, at the amber light strengthening now behind the dark silhouette of the oaks, at nothing in particular, or perhaps at everything at once, at 53 years of watching this institution from its most interior rooms, of understanding precisely how it operated, of knowing, better than most people alive, what it was capable of protecting and what it was capable of doing to protect it. The mare tossed her head. Anne didn't move. Holford stood in the frost below her, still breathing hard, watching her face with the expression of a man who has delivered something and is now waiting to understand what he has delivered. She folded the document, slowly, deliberately, with the careful, specific precision of someone who understood that what they held was no longer just paper, that it had crossed in the reading from information into something that functioned more like a weapon. She folded it and pressed it flat and tucked it inside her riding jacket, directly against her chest, directly against the warmth of her own body. Then she looked down at Holford. When she spoke, her voice was completely steady, quiet in the way that certain people become quiet when they are, in fact, operating at the outermost edge of their self-control, when every available resource has been redirected toward the single task of revealing nothing. "Get me Sir Alistair," she said. "Tell him it's not a request." She turned the mare. She rode back toward the house at a pace that had nothing to do with sport. Holford stood alone in the frozen field, the torn envelope in his hand, watching her go. The mist swallowed her within 30 seconds, the gray mare and the straight-backed figure dissolving into the morning as completely as though they had never been there. He stood there for a long time after she disappeared. He would not be able to explain later, not to himself, not to anyone, the precise nature of what he felt standing in that field. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was something older and less specific than fear, the feeling of having set something in motion that was now irrevocably in motion. Inside Gatcombe, every room was still dark except one. The study light came on at 6 minutes past 6. Anyone watching the house from the frost-white grounds, and there was, as yet, no one watching, would have seen it as a single warm rectangle in the gray face of the building, small, steady, unremarkable. Inside, Anne sat at her desk with the document spread open before her, and did not move for 4 full minutes. She was not frozen. She was thinking, with the kind of total architectural concentration that had characterized her at her best across half a century of public life. Organizing, sequencing, calculating the precise distance between what she now knew and what could be done about it. There were things you tolerated inside an institution like this one. There were things you absorbed and filed and chose, for reasons of loyalty or practicality or simple survival, to leave alone. And there were things you could not leave alone, not because of what they meant to you personally, not because of pride or old grievances or the accumulated weight of a lifetime of watching others take liberties with things they hadn't earned, but because of what leaving them alone would mean, because of what it would make you in the silent accounting that happens when there is no audience and no applause and nothing left but the question of whether you did what you knew was right. This was the second kind of thing. She pulled a sheet of personal stationery toward her, picked up her pen, wrote 4 lines by hand, direct, unadorned, in the manner of someone who had never confused brevity with inadequacy, sealed the envelope herself, set it to one side. Then she picked up the phone. She did not know in that moment the precise shape of what was coming. She did not know about the second file, or the photograph, or the handwritten memo with its 3 initial letters that would, in the weeks ahead, reframe everything she thought she understood. She did not know about the hearing, or the warrant, or the morning she would walk out of a Whitehall chamber in complete silence and feel, simultaneously, that she had lost everything and surrendered nothing. She knew only what the document told her, and that was enough. By nightfall, the most quietly explosive legal filing in modern royal history was already in motion. No press release, no leak, no announcement of any kind. Just a woman, a desk, a phone call made in the dark. And somewhere in London, in an office that kept the kind of hours that serious legal business occasionally demands, a fax machine receiving 3 pages that would, before the month was out, force the most private corridors of the British establishment to reckon with something they had been absolutely certain would stay hidden. Outside, the frost was beginning to melt. The sun had finally cleared the tree line. The day, like everything that mattered, had begun without permission. The crown protects its own, until the day someone inside it decides it no longer should. Old alliances and older secrets. London smelled like rain that hadn't fallen yet. That particular heaviness, the kind that presses down on the city like a held breath, had settled over St. James's Street by the time Anne's car eased to a stop outside a building with no sign above its door. That was deliberate. Places like this had never needed signs. Their anonymity was the point. If you didn't already know where you were going, you had no business going there. The Marlborough Club occupied a narrow Georgian townhouse wedged between a wine merchant and a private bank. Both equally discreet, both equally expensive. Inside, the carpets were the color of old port. The lighting was low enough to render everyone ageless. Conversations conducted within these walls had a way of never leaving, absorbed over generations, into the dark paneling like smoke into cloth. Sir Alistair Pemberton was already at the table, 81 years old and sharp as broken glass. He had served the Crown Estate for 34 years, retiring quietly enough that most people forgot he existed, which was, those who knew him understood, entirely intentional. What fewer people knew was that 2 decades ago, he had provided quiet legal counsel to those navigating Princess Diana's most sensitive private affairs. He and Anne shared the specific bond of people who had witnessed the same storm from different windows, and chosen, mutually, to say nothing, until now. She placed the document on the table without preamble. He read it without rushing. When he set it down and removed his glasses, the room felt smaller somehow. "It's real," he said, not a question. "I know it's real," Anne replied. "Tell me how bad it is." He was quiet for a moment that stretched uncomfortably long. Outside, the rain finally arrived, thin and cold against the darkened window glass. "The transfer violated the Crown Estate Act," he said. "Not a gray area, not a technicality." He held her gaze. "Illegal." The word landed like something dropped from a great height. He reached into his case and placed a second file on the table between them, thicker, its edges worn from handling. He didn't open it. His finger rested on the cover. "The property isn't the story, Anne. What's been moved through it? That's the story." She reached for the file. His hand didn't move. His eyes met hers, and in them, For the first time in 30 years of knowing this man, she saw something that stopped her completely. It looked very much like fear. Some rooms hold secrets for years. The dangerous ones hold them just long enough. The palace pushes back. The filing was meant to be confidential. It was not confidential for 48 hours. Word had moved through channels it had absolutely no business moving through. Clean, fast, and deliberate. The way information only travels when someone with precise access and clear intention carries it personally. The Privy Council had fewer than 12 people with knowledge of the filing at that stage. One of them had walked it directly to the palace before the ink had finished drying. Anne registered this, filed it, said nothing. The summons arrived on a Wednesday morning, embossed paper, specific time, no explanation. The kind of correspondence that didn't request, it simply stated. She had been receiving versions of it her entire life, and she had always gone because she had been raised to go, because going was what duty looked like when it was unglamorous and inconvenient and asked things of you that you would rather not give. She went. The meeting was private, no staff, no witnesses beyond the protection detail, positioned outside a door thick enough to make their presence purely ceremonial. Charles received her standing. That told her everything before a single word passed between them. He asked her to stand down, not as her brother. If the register had been carefully set aside, she could see the effort it cost him, but as her king, formal, measured. The full weight of the institution arranged behind every syllable. She refused. The silence that followed was the loudest thing she had experienced in years. "You don't know what you're pulling on," he said. She looked at him for a long moment. At the face she had known longer than almost any other face on earth. At the careful, pressured composure of a man who was, she understood, genuinely frightened, not of her, but of what she had found. "Then perhaps," she said quietly, "someone you should have told, Mother." Charles said nothing, but something moved behind his eyes. A recognition, brief and unguarded, gone almost before it arrived. It was enough. She left. Back at Gatcombe, she discovered what had happened with James Holford. A misfiled message thread, mundane in appearance, devastating in content. 11 years of trust collapsed into a single screen of text she was never meant to see. Her movements, her schedule, her private communications passed quietly and regularly to the king's office. She dismissed him the same evening, alone, no confrontation, no raised voice, no performance of any kind, simply the facts, stated once, and then the door. The door closing was the loudest she had ever shut it. 3 days later, the tabloids arrived, unstable, bitter, consumed by lifelong jealousy of Camilla. The stories appeared within hours of each other across 4 separate outlets, identical in tone, surgical in timing, too coordinated to be anything other than what they were. Someone had written a narrative, someone had distributed it. Anne read every word, folded the papers, set them aside. That evening, a message arrived from Sir Alistair, handwritten on plain paper. "Open the second file. Tonight. Don't call me after." She had survived the institution. The question now was whether the institution intended to survive her. What was inside the second file? Midnight at Gatcombe Park. Every room dark except one. The study lamp threw a narrow circle of amber light across the desk, leaving the rest of the room in deep shadow. The bookshelves, the framed photographs, the small collection of equestrian trophies that nobody had ever arranged for display, and nobody had ever thought to move. Outside, the Gloucestershire countryside was absolutely still. No wind, no movement. The kind of silence that only arrives in the dead middle of winter nights, when even the land seems to have withdrawn into itself. Anne opened the second file. The first pages were financial records, transfer documents threading money from the Raymill Private Trust through a series of intermediary accounts, each one cleaner than the last, each one a door closing quietly behind whoever had walked through it. The chain terminated in an offshore holding entity, registered in the Cayman Islands under a corporate name that meant nothing to anyone who didn't already know what they were looking for. She kept reading. The holding entity connected through 3 further layers of incorporation, each one registered in a different jurisdiction, to a European property development company with documented commercial ties to 2 foreign governments. One of those governments had active and well-documented intelligence interests in Britain. This was not speculation. It was in the file, sourced, cross-referenced, assembled by someone who had spent a considerable amount of time and considerable resources, making certain that every link in the chain could be demonstrated rather than merely alleged. She turned the page. The surveyor's report came next. Commissioned privately, 18 months before the coronation, by a firm with no visible connection to anything royal, clinical in its language, methodical in its assessment. It described the uncatalogued archive beneath Raymill House in terms that were deliberately restrained, and yet even through the restraint, the magnitude of what lay beneath that Wiltshire estate was impossible to obscure. Documents spanning nearly 2 centuries, land surveys, private correspondence between members of the royal family, and figures whose names had been, in some cases, officially removed from historical records. Artifacts whose existence had never been publicly acknowledged. The covenant had not been placed on Raymill House to protect the property. It had been placed there to protect what the property was hiding. Then she found the memo. 2 paragraphs, handwritten. The paper aged at its edges in the way of documents handled repeatedly over many years. It referenced a private meeting, a dinner, the location identified only by a city and a season, at which the archive, the covenant, and the commercial potential of the mineral rights beneath the estate had been explicitly discussed. At the bottom, in the slanted and deliberate hand of someone who wrote as though every word carried personal weight, CMP? Anne stared at the date beside the initials. 6 years before the marriage, 8 years before the coronation, long before the public had been asked to accept, to welcome, to celebrate, long before any of it had been presented to the world as love. This had not been opportunistic. It had not been a private arrangement made in the complicated aftermath of a complicated life. It had been constructed, deliberately, patiently, across years. A condition agreed upon before a proposal was ever made, before a ring was ever chosen, before the machinery of royal acceptance had been set carefully in motion. Access to the archive, the mineral rights, the contents of a covenant that was never meant to be touched. These were the terms. At the bottom of the file, beneath everything else, a single photograph. 2 figures seated at a table, documents spread between them. Behind them, a chandelier, distinctive, identifiable to anyone who knew the room. One figure had their back partially to the camera, the other faced it almost directly. Anne looked at that second face for a long time. She knew it. She closed the file, sat in the dark and the silence of the study with both hands flat on the cover, and her eyes focused on the middle distance, where certain people do their clearest and most consequential thinking. Somewhere in London, she understood, in a building she had never visited, connected to money she could not trace, someone already knew she had made the call to the journalist. Someone was already deciding what to do about it. The most dangerous moment in any battle, her father had told her once, was not the attack. It was the silence before the response. Outside, the Gloucestershire night gave nothing away. Neither did she. The most dangerous moment in any battle is not when your enemy attacks. It is when they go quiet. The hearing. The room had no windows. That was deliberate. Rooms like this one, wood-paneled, low-ceilinged, buried in the institutional interior of a Whitehall building whose facade gave nothing away, were designed to exist outside of weather, outside of daylight, outside of anything that might remind the people inside them that the ordinary world was still turning beyond these walls. Proceedings conducted here were not meant to feel connected to the outside. They were meant to feel final. The emergency Privy Council hearing convened at 9 o'clock on a gray Tuesday morning in December. Anne arrived alone. No entourage, no supporting legal team arranged behind her in a show of institutional force. No carefully selected aide positioned at her shoulder to pass documents and project the image of an operation. She carried a single leather folder, sat down on her designated side of the long table, and placed the folder in front of her with the unhurried precision of someone who had spent the previous 3 weeks ensuring that every single thing she needed was already inside it. Across the table, Camilla's representation occupied 4 chairs. A King's Counsel flanked by 3 solicitors, each with their own folder, their own prepared materials, their own carefully constructed architecture of counter-argument. They arranged themselves with the quiet efficiency of people who had done this before and expected to do it again. The proceedings opened without ceremony. Camilla's King's Counsel presented the counterfiling with measured, almost hypnotic composure. Sovereign immunity. Personal estate matters predating the role of queen consort. The Raymill transfer, he argued, fell entirely outside the legitimate jurisdiction of this body, a private arrangement concerning private property, conducted through legitimate legal channels by a private individual who had not, at the time of filing, assumed any formal constitutional role. It was a well-constructed argument, clean, difficult to attack directly. Anne presented her case anyway. She worked through it methodically. The covenant, the financial chain, the offshore entity, the surveyor's report, the memo and its 3 initialed letters at the bottom of the page. She laid each element on the table in sequence, without theater, without the rhetorical flourishes that might have made for compelling viewing, but would have cost her the specific credibility she needed in a room like this one. She was calm in the way that only thoroughly prepared people are calm. Not because the stakes were low, but because she had made peace, in the weeks since Gatcombe, with every possible outcome. She had done what was right. Whatever happened next would happen. 40 minutes into the proceedings, Camilla's King's Counsel reached into his folder and produced a single document, a royal warrant, signed, dated, bearing the king's personal seal with the unmistakable clarity of something, executed carefully and deliberately by someone who understood precisely what they were signing and why. It authorized the Raymill transfer retrospectively. Every element Anne had demonstrated as a violation, addressed, covered, legally absorbed into the warrant's language with a thoroughness that had clearly required serious legal construction. The date on the warrant was 3 days after Anne had filed the hearing. 3 days. Charles had known. He had read what she submitted, understood what it contained, and chosen, with full knowledge and full deliberate intention, to protect Camilla anyway. The room was very quiet. Anne looked across the table at the King's senior representative, a man she had known for 20 years, who had attended her mother's funeral, who could not now hold her gaze for more than 2 seconds before finding something on the table in front of him that required his attention. She said nothing. She closed her leather folder, stood, buttoned her coat with the same quiet efficiency she had brought to every moment of this proceeding, gathered the folder from the table, and walked out. No statement, no parting observation, no final word designed to linger in the room after she had left it. Simply the steady sound of her footsteps crossing the floor, the door opening and then closing. The room did not make a sound. Outside, the December air hit her like cold water. Sharp, immediate, clarifying. The gray sky pressed low over Whitehall, the street below quiet in the particular mid-morning lull between the rush of arrival and the chaos of lunch. Her protection officer moved toward her from his position at the building's entrance. At the bottom of the stone steps, a man stood with his collar turned against the cold, a leather satchel over one shoulder. He had the specific stillness of someone who had been waiting for a long time and had made their peace with waiting. The journalist. Her protection officer stepped forward. She raised one hand without looking at him. 5 minutes, she said. She walked down the steps toward the waiting figure, and the gray December morning swallowed them both. She had lost the hearing. She had not lost. The last Windsor standing. The story published on a Thursday morning, not front page. Page 3 below the fold in the measured and precise language of a newspaper that understood the difference between a story and a grenade, and had chosen, deliberately, to detonate this one quietly. No screaming headline, no dramatic photography. Just clean, sourced, verified prose that laid the financial chain, the offshore trust, the covenant breach, and the retrospective warrant before the reading public with the calm authority of a document that knew exactly how much it didn't need to shout. The people who needed to read it had read it before breakfast. By the following morning, parliamentary questions had been tabled by 3 separate members. By the morning after that, the Crown Estate announced an independent review into the Raymill Covenant and its associated transfer. The announcement issued in language so carefully neutral, it could have been written by someone actively trying to say nothing while being legally obligated to say something. 2 European embassies issued statements within 72 hours. Neither confirmed anything, neither denied anything. Both were so precisely, so architecturally constructed in their non-commitment that they communicated to anyone fluent in the language of institutional self-protection everything they were designed to withhold. The photograph was identified on the fourth day, not by Anne, not by the journalist who had honored every condition she had set, but by a retired palace aide who had recognized, in the published description of the chandelier visible in the photograph's background, a private dining room in a European city he had visited twice during his years of service. He made one phone call to someone he trusted. That person made another. By evening, the identity of the second figure at the table had reached 4 newsrooms simultaneously. A senior member of a European royal family, direct personal ties to the property development company, commercial interests in the Raymill mineral rights stretching back nearly a decade before the transfer was ever filed. On the 6th day, a woman named Margaret Elspeth Courtenay knocked on the journalist's office door. She was 83 years old. She had served Queen Elizabeth for 32 years as a lady-in-waiting, present at more private moments of the late Queen's life than almost any other living person. She sat down across from the journalist, folded her hands in her lap, and explained, without drama and without hesitation, that she had sent the original document to Gatcombe Park. She had found it through channels she declined to specify. She had held it for several months, uncertain. Then she had acted. "The Queen asked me to watch," she said. "She never told me what to do if I saw something. I decided for myself." What she produced next, from a plain envelope she had carried inside her coat, was a second sealed letter, addressed in handwriting that required no identification to anyone who had seen it before. It was addressed to Anne. Queen Elizabeth had commissioned a private review of the Raymill Covenant in the final year of her life. She had left no instructions. Only this letter, held by Margaret Courtenay, waiting, with the particular patience of someone who understood that certain things revealed their moment rather than being assigned one. Anne received it that evening. She read it alone in the study at Gatcombe, under the same narrow lamp that had illuminated the second file on the midnight she had opened it. We do not know what it said. The independent review unwound the Raymill transfer on technical grounds 6 weeks later. No public admission. No charges brought. No names attached to any finding. The offshore entity dissolved quietly within the same period, its registered directors resigning in a sequence spaced carefully enough to avoid the appearance of coordination. The archive beneath Raymill House was reclassified, sealed under provisions that placed its contents beyond public access for 100 years. Charles and Anne did not speak for 4 months. Camilla remained. The retrospective warrant held. The institution absorbed everything: the exposure, the review, the parliamentary questions, the European embarrassment, and continued, as institutions of sufficient age and sufficient power always continue, without public acknowledgement that anything had required absorbing. On a morning in late February, with the frost returning to the Gloucestershire fields and the sky resuming its familiar grey indifference, Anne rode out again at 5:30. Same hour, same fields. Same grey mare moving beneath her with the easy authority of an animal entirely at home in the cold and the dark and the wide silence of early morning. Her new secretary was waiting at the field's edge when she turned back toward the house. He was standing still, not running, she noted, with something that was not quite satisfaction and not quite relief. He held an envelope at his side. She rode toward him, took it without stopping. She looked at it for one moment. At the seal, at the handwriting on the front, at the particular weight of it in her gloved hand that told her, before she had opened a single page, that whatever was inside was not small. She tucked it against her chest, as she wrote on. Some battles are won in silence. Some secrets outlive the people who kept them. And some mornings, the only honest thing left to do is ride.